What is truth? The clearest aspect that helps us to begin to understand truth is a partial definition, not a full definition. But it's still a strong contingent aspect of truth. And that is this: truth is always consistent within itself. Truth is always consistent within itself. This is the one aspect used in philosophy, in science, and in debates, because its core is in reason and logic. Now, this partial definition has withstood the test of time over the last 2,500 years. It is logical, it is reasonable, and is one that most people who appreciate honest dialogue and discussion can agree upon. It was used by the great philosopher Socrates in ancient Greece. Socrates was even called the divine Socrates by the early Christian fathers. They came up with the idea of limbo even, for a place for good souls to go, like that of Plato and Socrates after they died, because they could not imagine them going to hell and burning forever and ever. You see, Socrates and Plato taught 300 years before Jesus, about 2,300 years ago. So the early Christian church could not conceive of them going to heaven because they had not received the sacrament of baptism, which did not exist yet. So since they were not bad enough for hell, what are we going to do with them? It was time to consider another place for them to go. And so the Catholic Church introduced the concept of limbo, a place without pain, a place without suffering, but not yet quite heaven. Maybe just a place to discuss philosophy forever and ever. And so you had Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle assigned to limbo because they all died before Jesus. Well, now that's an interesting concept, Pastor Sampson. You talk to us about truth, but who are you to talk to us about truth? And you're trying to define an aspect of truth, but who gave you the authority to tell us that? Who gave you the authority to tell us evolution is a fact, for instance? What gives you that right? It's not only me. You may have heard of Bill Nye, the science guy. Take a look at your screen right now. You can see a picture here of an article from the Associated Press where Bill Nye said the Earth is definitely not 6,000 years old or only 10,000 years old. He said it is 4.5 billion years old. And he said, if this conflicts with your beliefs, I strongly feel that you should question your beliefs. He went on to warn that a nation that did not accept the facts of science must fall behind in technology and will no longer be able to innovate in science as it should. Let me begin by telling you that I used to be a fundamentalist pastor. I was one for 21 years. Back in 1998, I resigned from the ministry to take time out to think. You see, I ran into Charles Darwin, metaphorically speaking, because Darwin published his book on the origin of species back in 1859. I read it back in 1988, I'm sorry, back when I was in my early 30s. And I was stunned by how modern it sounded and how up-to-date it was with the facts. Darwin, in effect, blew me away. One of the only things at the time that he didn't understand was the science of genetics, because it was not invented yet. And so for me began a 20-year study of evolution, from disciplines from biology to zoology to genetics to DNA evidence to geology to paleontology to anthropology and even astronomy and planetology, which is a reference to the evolution of our solar system and the cosmos. After just 3 months of study, I became convinced that evolution was a fact, but I continued studying, and my study is still ongoing. Let me challenge you that despite the fact that you may not understand evolutionary theory, you might get at least a general understanding of it. Why is this important? Most fundamentalist pastors are going to say, why is this subject important to us? What's the big deal, Pastor Sampson? It doesn't matter whether we accept this or not. I mean, after all, the apostles didn't understand this. The early church didn't understand this for 1900 years. If you believe that this is true, that this is not important, you are sadly mistaken. Do you remember from our first video when I referred to Dr. Bruce Waltke and what he said? He said that evangelical Christianity could be facing a crisis if it does not come to accept the facts of science and specifically evolution, as a viable explanation for the existence of humanity. Remember that Dr. Walke had talked against evolution for most of his life, but he had the courage near the end of his life to admit that he'd been wrong, and just a short while ago he was dismissed from his teaching position at his fundamentals college in Florida. But now we're going to speak as to what Dr. Walke actually confronted and why it is important that other fundamentals pastors follow his lead. Dr. Walke understood something that the mainline evangelicals world does not. Let me put it to you this way. If you reject the fact of evolution, you are in fact rejecting the way that God brought into existence all of objective reality. And that has major implications. In the second part of video number 2 here, I'm going to go into detail on the kinds of truth. Go now to part 2.